Attention startup leaders. Are you strapped for time but hungry for strategic insights? Introducing Managed Chaos, your go-to podcast for navigating the startup world in less time than your morning commute. Join us as we share expert advice, real-world examples, and actionable strategies to help you scale your business, allocate resources effectively, and achieve visionary results. Tune into Managed Chaos and join a community of like-minded innovators on the path to entrepreneurial success.
When you are deep in your business, you can talk about it fluently, but that fluency doesn't always translate to outsiders. Are you able to communicate your success, allowing others, and really read here, investors, to measure your current and future progress? Equally important, are you able to talk about your business so that others can see the potential? I'm Rachel Anderson.
And I'm Katrina Purcell.
And today we are talking about how others evaluate your business's potential. So, Katrina, when you think about the evaluation of business, even from early stages, what are the initial areas someone may look at to value that business or even measure the success?
It's a great question. So I think really there are some typical areas that we think of, right? They're going to look at my revenue. They're going to look at my sales, my general operations. But really, it's a click down from that people really care about to understand the longer term health of your business or your idea. And so it's about understanding what is the mix of your revenue. So do you have multiple products? How are those products selling? What are your customers saying, right? So are your customers buying more of your products, or are they, only buying one of your products, even though you've expanded your product set? Are they renewing? Do they tend to sell down, right? So maybe they're not buying as many subscriptions year over year. But also, how are those accounts impacting your unit economics? So how much does it actually cost you to service those customers? And is the amount of revenue that you're getting from those customers offsetting those costs, or is revenue starting to slow down and not keep pace with the costs, which might be rising, especially given our current environment of inflationary pressures?
Yeah, that's some great questions to ask. And I think you said your unit economics, which I thought was such an interesting term. But I think that it's really descriptive, right? You're looking at the whole ecosystem of what you provide. And it's not just the bottom line, which does need to say something, but it's really the path to getting to that number that you need to examine and have good insights to.
Yeah, because the path to the number is what gives your either investors or whoever's looking at your business confidence that it's repeatable. So you can have one really good quarter of revenue and never do it again if you don't have those underlying things kind of all tightened and working in sync with each other.
Yeah, that's great. So you talked just a minute ago about really trying to dig deeper into those metrics. So what is something that people may dig into more to demonstrate value, kind of along the same vein, especially in more restricted lending markets, which we've seen a good flux of that kind of, is it restricted, is it open, is it free in the last couple of years? And so that's a really timely consideration.
Yeah, so I think it's really about what is your cost to acquire your customers? And then also, what is the lifetime value of those customers? And so those are kind of the high level numbers, right? That sometimes you'll see on a slide deck or you'll see someone ask about. But what's really happening underneath those numbers is starting to get an understanding of, what is the average revenue per user of your system? Are you retaining them? What does the churn look like? How can you start to pull on those levers as a management team to understand how to increase your lifetime value of your customers? Now, obviously, if your business hasn't been around very long, that lifetime value might be quite short. And if you're doing year-to-year contracts, you may not know, how long you would have a customer. And so you have to start to kind of think about and use assumptions, but be able to then explain why you're using those assumptions and how they might fundamentally change the numbers that you're talking about. I think the other,
That's okay. So do you really look then like at any businesses that are maybe too early for some of those metrics, or what do you do? Is that kind of the solution?
Yeah, I was just about to say, so I do think, so for early stage, it's kind of hard to have those metrics, right? You might not know how much it's going to cost to acquire customers long-term, because right now you're trying to just have them know who you are. And that brand awareness is, taking up a lot of your costs. And eventually that wouldn't be the cost to acquire your customer, because your brand would become more well-known and you wouldn't have to put in that effort. And so it's really important to start to understand what your product market fit looks like. And I think there's an entrepreneur, his name is Sean Ellis, and he actually has a really good phrase that he uses. And he asks users, how would you feel if you could no longer use this product? So really doing research. When you're talking to investors or people to value your business, they're going to talk to everyone they can talk to. They're going to talk to your customers. They're going to talk to your suppliers. They're going to talk to everyone within your ecosystem. So you should be asking those questions first. And if you're scared or nervous to hear the answers, you need to ask the questions even more, because you need to be the first person who hears the answers. And so when people are talking to you about whether or not they would be upset to not have your product, if over 40% say that you would be very disappointed or some version of very disappointed, then you're in a pretty good position, because you know that your customers are valuing what you're selling to them.
Yeah, I think that is really good insight. And 40%, I mean, that's a high number, which
it is a high bar.
Yeah, I really like that. So tell me, I think when a lot of times we have these conversations about money and valuation, and really making sure that you can talk about the evaluation potential, which I think is a good way to say not the profitability of your company, but really the viability of your company. We often talk about it in context for getting that next round of funding, or really looking to capitalize on what it means to be doing well from a fiscal sense. But I think that there's a lot of other potential ways that this could be valuable for a business to be able to talk about this kind of fluency and be able to articulate these different things. Can you talk a little bit about these overarching areas, and really when or why leaders should really know, outside of just, for investors, this language, and to be able to articulate the customer acquisition cost, the other things that really show that success?
Yeah, I think it's so important, because in reality, especially in the earlier stages, when you don't necessarily have proven growth metrics, where you're not showing that you've already gone from point A to point B and you're just going to use the funding now to get to point C, it's really important that you're able to tell your story. And it's important that the people you're talking to believe in you. And that's not just your investors. That could be future employees, people who you're trying to get on your management team, people who you're trying to get on your board. They need to have confidence in the founder and the founding team, that they're the right team to take this idea to the next level. And part of that comes to, do you have experience with the technology? Does anyone on your team truly understand the problem that you're trying to solve? So have you, taken someone from a potential customer and really been able to kind of turn them into one of your more valuable team members, because they actually inherently understand the problem? I worked with one startup where the founder himself came from the world that he was going to service, right? And so he inherently understood the challenges that they were having and was able to really speak the language of the customer, which was so important when it came to telling the story, because a customer oftentimes wants to know that the person who's selling to them actually understands and cares about what's happening. And you can't get that from just any old salesperson, right? They really have to truly understand it. The other piece that I think is sometimes overlooked is sort of the fact that these rounds, the pricing, all that is really largely, especially in the startup world, loosely based in reality, right? And so there's an element of saying, okay, we're looking at your forward-looking revenue, we're then going to apply a multiple. Where does that multiple come from? Well, who knows, right? It's coming from what we predict to be your competitors. It's coming from perhaps the public markets, which could either be over or underinflated. It's coming from, a breadth of knowledge that someone has. And then it's just being assigned to your company. Now, we can go through phases where the multiples are really high and people are living large, right? Because they think this is so amazing. And then it comes down in, 2023, we saw a downside, right? Of sort of, well, the multiples weren't where they were. And now companies are going to have to do what they call a down round. And in reality, it's just this pricing that was sort of set arbitrarily. It's not exactly, scientific necessarily as to the true value of what you have. And I think that's why it's so important to really be able to speak the story and really be able to start to understand how you plan to take your company from point A to point B and really get people to understand and feel that. You need the metrics to back it up. You need information to back it up. But if you can't sell that story and sell that sort of experience of how the company is going to move, you may actually run out of cash flow before you're able to accomplish the goal, right? And so part of what you're doing as you're kind of this delicate dance is monitoring what is your runway, what is your cash burn? How are you increasing your revenue in relation to your cash burn? And are you able to keep that multiple in a range that you're comfortable with?
Yeah, it's some great advice. I love that phrase, speak the story. Like you have to not just know the numbers, but you got to be able to answer the why. Why is it the way it is? And that really tells the story of your company, regardless of where you're positioned in valuation, heft, notoriety, etc. So, okay, final question. Our businesses are approaching those moments. They realize that we need a better story to tell. We have to be able to understand that one level down. We got to dig deeper. So what are some practical things that a leader can do to get that knowledge if they don't right now? Who are they talking to? What are the top maybe 3 things that they should start with? What's your practical advice?
Great question. I think right there is where you definitely need someone who's running your marketing team. So it doesn't need to necessarily be a CMO. It could be a fractional CMO. It could be a VP of marketing. But you need someone who's going to be able to take your story and turn it into something that kind of sings, right? Both from a numbers standpoint and from just the overall story standpoint is number one, right? So understanding and digging into the data around the customer acquisition costs, understanding that lifetime value, and then understanding how, if those numbers aren't saying what you want them to say now, your plan to change them. So what does that look like? So a strong finance person who's helping you with those unit economics, helping you to understand, because in reality, if you're not monitoring your runway and you're not looking at that cash burn in relation to your revenue, all of this is a moot point, because what are you going to do if you have no money, right? And if you've exhausted all of your own personal resources, you need to be able to convince others to invest, whether it's angel investors or going out and actually trying to do a full round with institutional investors. So really investing in someone who understands your story and understands how to tell your story, and then is able to work with you to have the data to back it up, I think is the most important thing.
Yeah, I love that. I had a CEO at one company who would go down and take sales calls with his sales team. And it was always, good for company morale.
Yeah.
Our customers would be like, wow, I'm talking to the CEO. This is amazing, right? These different things. But I think that and I don't think that every, small business needs to do that, or every business or whatever. Although I think there is
there is definitely the CEO came to the call, right? I mean, I do think there's definitely value there. And as a CEO, you should always be additive to those calls, not a liability, right? And so you do the intro, you do, the fun part of the call, but leave it to your team who knows what they're doing to do the real nuts and bolts of the selling on the call. Or else you're going to be giving away deep discounts because you're the CEO and you feel like you should.
Yes, I've actually seen that. That is a real life example right there. Yes, you're absolutely right. But I think even in that learning, right, find the person that knows the information that you have to be able to tell the story about. And so if you need to know what your customer acquisition cost is, then go talk to a salesperson who's dealing with the customers that churn. Go talk to the product person who's trying to answer the bugs that the customers report and aren't getting solutions for, right? So just start to spend time understanding the story, and then the numbers and all the other things, I think, is another really great way to position progress on really
exactly. And that comes back to what we talked about earlier. You can't be afraid to ask the questions. You can't be afraid to say, why are you churning? Why are you going to this, where are you going and why? How does this competitor better help you? What are the things that we haven't done that we should do? And asking those questions, you might get answers you don't want to hear, but you probably need to hear.
Absolutely. And vice versa. Why are you growing? Why are you doing so well? Because if you don't know what the formula is or the secret sauce, then you can't replicate that in the future. But truly, exactly. You said it earlier. I actually wrote down because I was like, this is so good. If you're too scared to hear the answers, you need to ask. So I love that as a final rallying cry for really understanding how to talk about your success, not just with investors, but with everybody. This has been another great episode of the Managed Chaos podcast. We're so glad that you're here. Feel free to stream this on anywhere that you like to listen to your podcast, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and at themanagedchaospodcast.com. We will see you next time.
This was another informative episode of Managed Chaos, the podcast for startups. You can find us on all of your favorite podcasting apps, as well as on Instagram and YouTube, where we are at Managed Chaos Podcast. For additional resources or to continue the conversation, you can find Katrina Purcell and Rachel Anderson on LinkedIn.